So first I want to say hi to everyone. We can go to the first slide because there are some URLs that I want to point out. And if you could, yeah, no, go backwards the other way. The other way. There you go. Thank you, Lance. Thank you, Randall. As you can see, Randall and I have a long relationship where we have been lobbying together and doing advocacy, and he's done a phenomenal job in introducing me to your West Virginia congressional delegation. Some of them are really key players. I think we all saw over the past week that Senator Manchin has superpowers in the Senate in getting certain legislation done, especially now that it's a 50-50 split. He's really become omnipowerful. So I really believe in integrating the grassroots voice closest to home with whatever our national policy issues that will not only impact you back home, but it'll impact lots of others in other parts of the country as well. Sometimes it's, I've been in situations where it's the voice of a particular arts council in a rural part of a state who is represented by the chairman of a committee, and they need to hear the voice of their constituent. And that one arts council could be a two-person arts council in a rural part of a state, is able to tell their firsthand story about the impact of how some federal funds or a federal policy will have a positive impact on them. And that's enough for the chairman who oversees the entire national budget for a particular area will make a difference. And you know how Randall was talking about thank you letters that should be going to your governor, and I totally agree with that. But sometimes we need to send thank you letters to that small rural arts council that did it for the entire country. So that I think will be a theme that you're going to see throughout my presentation. But I couldn't help but kind of share something like that because it does make a big difference. And especially now that you have the all-powerful Senator Manchin representing you, getting in his ear and telling him specific stories about what we might need is going to be really present. So you might hear me come back to you of when we might need you. And just remember what I told you, and that is your voice can make a huge difference. Okay, so now with the official presentation. So I've been with Americans for the Arts for 28 years. I'm the Chief Counsel of Government and Public Affairs, but I wear two hats actually. I'm also the Executive Director of the Americans for the Arts Action Fund. For short, we call it Arts Action Fund. And that has been around for 15 years. It's an affiliated organization, and it's really the grassroots component and the political element of what we do to advance the arts in America. Our membership starts at free. Most of our members are free. For those who can give, they give, but it's free. So if you're not already a member, and I've seen some of the participants who've joined, and I know that you're members of either Americans for the Arts or both Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund, I thank you. And for those who aren't, under the red part of the screen is how you can join for free. These slides today that we're going to be presenting, we have supplied to Lance, and he's going to be putting it into the resource section for this webinar. So you'll have access to them. And also, I just thought that, you know, if there's one that you want to take a picture of, it might be this one because it has all these key URLs that I'm going to be talking about today. The first one is our COVID-19 resources that literally has everything from the latest breaking news up to the minute of legislative updates related to upcoming federal resources coming through. It has the resources table that I've created because it's hard to manage, you know, all the different things that are happening, how they've been updated with every new legislation. So I have a resource table that kind of lets you know where the funding is and what you're eligible for at this moment. And then our third URL there is our policy updates. And if you just want to see the legislative news and updates, that's where that is. And some of that I'll be talking about today, so that might be important. I'm going to go into later on near the end some of these new COVID resources that are in the American Rescue Plan that I just previewed to you by our chit chat with Randall. But I want you to know that some of it I'm going to probably have to go over quickly because we got a lot to do. And if you have questions about any of them, I invite you to also join me every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern for my Zoom office hours. And kind of like this, it's a group of people come and they just one after the other ask me questions about unique situations to their scenario of whether they can apply, what they should do they need to get forgiveness for their PPP before they get a second draw? When will the shuttered venue grants open? How do I reclaim my unemployment? I got bumped off. All that, everything under the sun related to COVID resources, I try to answer one by one. It's, as I mentioned, it's free and it's every Friday. So that's the URL to join us there. And then finally, if you are so inspired, today you're doing State Arts Advocacy Day, but then there's going to be an Advocacy Day for federal issues that happens every year that we put on. And that's called the National Arts Action Summit. And this year, as with all things, it will be virtual, but the dates are important. And that's April 5th through the 9th. And we encourage all of you to join. And again, for this year, that's unique and different is that normally there's a nominal registration fee for individuals to join, but this year we've opened it up that you can get a fully subsidized one for free. So there's no financial barriers whatsoever, and we encourage you all to participate. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so I want to give you context for how I always see how, if you want to make change happen, especially if it requires legislation, it's a public policy issue. This is the wheel that I think eventually everyone has to go through in order to make that change happen, whether it is a local ordinance change or it is a state appropriations issue, or whether it is a federal policy and eligibility issue or a tax issue. Pretty much you have to go through this wheel to eventually get what you want. If it's an election year, there's one particular one that you have to do, but otherwise you have to go through each one of these points. So for this conference today, I'm guessing if you look at what would be the 1 o'clock part of the clock, identify, evaluate, problem opportunities, you got to start there, because if you're looking for change, if you're looking for something different to happen, you have to identify what's not working for you to be able to make that case. And when you really kind of reflect on that, so let's say what you're asking for is merely an increase in appropriations for the arts. Well, you have to kind of first go through the step of thinking about why isn't it enough for what you're currently getting, so that you can make the case from your heart right through to the words that come out of your mouth as to why you are asking for this change. So it's really important when you go to make a case with the legislator, you're making that, because what they're thinking on the other end is, so why do you need this? And you need to be prepared really fast of being able to explain why it is that you need that. What would you do more with that kind of money? Then it moves to that second piece, which I kind of hinted at when I said, what would you do more with that money? And that is the idea development. Okay, so you're saying there's a need for more money in order to do X, Y, Z. You want to do that idea development of what X, Y, Z is. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to have one or two examples to really put some meat on the bone of what you're trying to articulate. Is it because right now, with the funds that are available for arts education, you're able to reach 20% of the children? And with these new funds, you'll be able to get up to 80%, whatever the number is. Or it could be that you only do one festival a year, but there's a need for doing two. That could be another example. And then third, it could just be because of the pandemic shutdown, we are at risk of many institutions going under or losing their staff that they've had for many years, and therefore losing that expertise. And we need to find a way to retain them until we can get through this pandemic. That's the kind of concept that you want to develop, from identifying what the need is to what you would do with that extra money. Then you want to conduct some empirical research to kind of help prove your point. So an example could be, it could be a simple survey that you do in your community, in your state, to say, how has COVID impacted you? How many people have gone on, have you had to lay off? How much of a loss have you had? It doesn't have to be done by a outside firm where you're paying thousands of dollars to do this. It could be done by SurveyMonkey. But you just have to be clear on what your methodology was to be able to share. Sometimes it's really expensive research, and sometimes it's just, talking to the members of your community or the arts organizations within your community. It's really as simple as that, but you just want a little bit of data to go with what you're trying to ask for. And then you move into messaging and coalition building. So with messaging, you have now what you start off with identifying the problem, and that's really a perception. You've identified a perception of a problem. Then you develop, well, what would we do with more? And then you gather together the research, the data to show that there truly is a need. This is not just a perception in my mind. This is data to prove my perception is correct. And then you develop, okay, so what's the best way to talk about this? That's the messaging part. And it's always better when you put more heads together so that you can get it from multiple perspectives. So you start developing a coalition. Sometimes the coalition are like-minded arts organizations. Sometimes the coalition is outside that. Let's say you're looking for an extension of the charitable deduction for nonprofit charities. So the arts are not the only charities in town. You can go to educational groups, you can go to science groups, you can go to religious groups and say, hey, we think our community would be better served if people had the incentive to give more through the tax system for a charitable deduction. So would you like to join us in this coalition? That makes your message even stronger. So combination of messaging and coalition building is good. And then we get to grassroots training. And that's where we are right now. That's where you are in this moment in time at this webinar. You are getting training on how to be a good grassroots advocate. Now, what does it mean to be a grassroots individual? That means you are closest to the ground and you are the one who is delivering the services in the arts. You are the one that is helping the creation and production of the arts for individuals, for the public, for kids, for families on the ground in your community. In my mind, you are the most important people. And what we want to be able to do is say, look, we've done all this work from 1 o'clock to 6 o'clock on the circle there to say, will you be involved with what we're thinking? This is the policy change that we think will not only help serve you better, but it will help serve our community, our state, our nation better. And so we want to educate you on the things that we know based on research gathering and messaging that we've developed. And then we want you to make it your own. So we don't want you to parrot what we say. We want you to take in what we say and then use your own words so it's delivered with the right passion. We just want it to kind of be on message. It doesn't mean the exact same words. It just means it needs to be on point in terms of if we're asking for an example, if we're asking for a $2 million increase, you can use all the words you want to get to that 2 million, but we don't want you to say something different than 2 million, because the number one easy way for a legislator to not do what you're asking is for them to hear from multiple different groups, different ways to make it better. Then that gives them an excuse to not do anything, because if they do one thing, it displeases the other. So nobody wants to get into a no-win situation. So we need to be unified before we talk to these decision makers so that they feel the strength and numbers behind what the ask is. And they feel like they will have a win if they make it, because Sally, who runs the theater, is going to be upset because I didn't ask for 2 million. But, Jim at the symphony is going to be fine because all he said we needed was 1.5 million. Do you see what I'm saying? So you want to stick to the message, and Margaret Mary is going to go through some of those specifics for your state, for your advocacy day. But I'm just kind of telling you generally, and I might get into a little bit of the federal issues, but Margaret Mary's here to do the state piece of it. And then just looking ahead as we go through the wheel, we have the visibility and media advocacy. This is an area that a lot of folks tend to overlook, but the media, especially in the last, I'd say, 2 decades, it's always been this way, but in the last 2 decades, because of opinion journalism, it has become even stronger, where you want to, and don't overlook the media, get them engaged on what your issues are. Assign someone within your coalition to do media, to do the outreach, to make sure that reporters understand what you're trying to accomplish so that they cover the story. And here's one of the most important reasons, and that is that even if you can't reach every legislator to tell them what you need, the media can, because those same decision makers are reading the papers, they're listening to the radio stations, they're listening to opinion journalism. So it's 2 ways of getting at it. They can help echo and amplify what your message is through their medium. And it can be very powerful medium. And if you get on their wrong side, it can also be a very disempowering medium as well. So be sure to involve them, and then tap into it from a writing up an opinion piece too. And one of the most clever tricks that I like telling people to do is to make sure that your opinion piece is read. When you write it, you know who you have in mind, of who you're trying to change the mind of. And it has to usually be 1 or 2 legislators, the governor, the mayor, or something like that. Whoever it is, put their name. This is the trick. Put their name in your opinion piece, because every day they have someone on their staff who scans all the media and highlights where their name has been mentioned. And then that goes to the top of the list for that decision maker to read in their daily activities. And so you've just now gone to the top of the list for that legislator or that politician to read what's been written about them. And it's highlighted in yellow, because I used to do this. And it's highlighted in yellow. So take advantage of that and put it in small papers, put it in big papers, do a radio piece, whatever it takes. They'll get a copy of it. And this is now expanded into social media in a big way too. When you go to make your social media post, if you want to congratulate, Randall just said, thank the governor, thank the governor. Well, maybe you're not going to sit down and write a letter, but what you can do is post it to your social media and thank the governor for what he's doing and for what Randall's talking about. But listen, if you want the governor to see that you thank them, you don't just thank the governor, you have to tag the governor for the governor to see that he's been thanked. So it works just the same way in social media. Then we move along the wheel and you're into legislative advocacy, what a lot of people call lobbying. And this is where you're actually doing, face-to-face or Zoom to Zoom, or through letter writing campaign, through email campaign. You are making contact with that decision maker, whether it's the governor or a state legislator, to say, this is what we need. You're using your great message points. You know what your ask is. It's unified with everyone else. You're referencing research. You're talking about your story of how it's going to impact you locally or on the state level, whatever is the closest to where your services go. And then it moves on to decision makers and messengers. And the reason why that's together is that you may, let's say this is a legislative issue. And remember, I gave an example of the chairman of a committee oversees a particular portfolio of appropriations. But let's say your representative isn't that chairman. Let's say your representative doesn't even sit on that committee that is chaired, that oversees that portfolio. Does that mean you just end there? And the answer is no. What you do then is you engage your representative who's not on those key committees, and you are asking that representative to do peer-to-peer advocacy to the chairman, so that while you are not a constituent of that chairman, your representative is a peer to that chairman, and they can have even more influence on the chairman of saying, look, this is my district. I'm hearing a lot from my district members about how important this is. This would mean a lot to me, Madam Chairman, if this were in the bill. Could you get it in the bill? That's an example of peer-to-peer advocacy. And then in an election year, you would move along the wheel to educating candidates, because you have to know what's happening around you, so that at the same time as you might be trying to move something through the legislature, there are candidates out there who might have an opposite position, making maybe they're specifically an opponent of funding for the arts, and they're trying to differentiate themselves from the current, say, governor or the current legislator. Well, you want to work on making sure they don't try to make the arts one of those wedge issues. So you begin educating them, say, look, this serves the community. Are you going to be opposed to your potential constituents, the voters in this community who love the arts? Look at the last polling, 90% off the charts. People love the arts in our community. Are you saying that you're going to be opposed to that, Madam Candidate? That's, and by the way, that is not doing electoral work. That does not cross over your 501c3 charity work, because all you're doing is education work there. You're not saying, I'm going to vote for you, I'm going to be a fundraiser for you. You're just saying, look, you're out of whack with what you're saying on the arts while you're out there on the campaign trail. The media is picking up your sound bites, things like that. You want to correct that early on. And then it gets to the final vote of how the decision comes down, and you want to track it. Don't stop right before you hit the finish line. You got to keep on going through the finish line, because run as fast as you can all the way to the end, and you see that vote happen. And then after the vote, you do exactly what Randall tells you to do, and you go and you thank the ones who did the right decision. And for the ones that didn't, ask them why. Don't let them off the hook. Ask them why. Keep engaging in the story. That politician is probably going to be there a long time. Give hope and an opportunity in an open lane of communication to be able to say, maybe next year, maybe you'll change your mind next year. What can I show you that will make a difference? Okay, let's go to the next slide. I won't spend that much time on all these slides, but that was the most important slide. Sometimes I do an entire webinar on that slide alone. But now I'm going to go through these a little bit more quickly. So there you see you in the middle. And my point here is merely that you're here today for a state legislative issue. But I just want you to know the things that you learn here, maybe not the specific message points about how much the state legislature should give to the arts, but what you learned here in terms of just advocacy training and how to do things and how politics works, you will be able to apply locally to your city, county commissions, your mayors, your county councils, your city managers, your county managers. You'll be able to also apply federally with your US members of the House of Representatives, your US senators, and the president. They all represent you. And you, as a voter, have a say with all three levels of government. Next slide, please. And then my point here is a little bit of what we talked about in the policy wheel is, so now let's say you are a grassroots or a grass tops person, which I'll explain in a moment. You have everyone working on the same unified message into the same one elected official. And I have already talked a little bit about grassroots. I've talked about peer-to-peer advocacy. Now I'm going to take a moment to talk about grass tops. So grass tops is not the richest person in the room. Grass tops can be the person closest to the elected official that has some kind of close relationship with that elected official where they will take their phone call, they know their phone number, they know their personal email address, they may get together with them for family get-togethers, or they might be a political supporter, a funder, or somehow an important business person that has, that employs 2% of the population in their community. So all these kinds of people have sway. So it could be, your cousin who went to college and was roommates with the elected official. It could be your mayor who has a close relationship with the state legislator in the West Virginia state legislature. It could be you who have hosted the governor in your theater and had lots of conversations, and you've kept up with the conversations, their staff that you can reach out to. These are all examples of grass tops. So you could be a grass top and a grassroots person. And all I'm just saying is that cultivate your grass tops, even though, let's say, you're now going to be meeting with your state legislators. Let your mayor know that you're about to be doing this, or afterwards. You can let mayors, city council members know that you're doing this. And the reason why is that they have a direct line into your state legislative representatives on what the needs of your community are. So why not also involve them? They are clearly grass tops people. Make them an advocate. And what you're really asking them to do is, look, you get a certain number of chits when you're dealing with politicians and with the position that you have. What are you going to spend your chits on? What's that one or two favors that you're going to ask that elected official to do? And what you're essentially doing is trying to get these grass tops to make your needs one of their chits that they use as a political carrying card with top line legislators and decision makers. Next slide, please. So where's the sweet spot? I talked a lot, not a lot, but I talked about coalitions and bringing people together. And what I have found in my 28 years of doing this is that there is a real sweet spot. And that sweet spot is when 4 areas kind of convene. And that is, starting from the top, a diversity of arts disciplines represented in the issue. So it's not just the most highly endowed institutions that are asking for this. You need to be able to show that a range of arts disciplines are interested and see that what we're asking for will also benefit them. If you go around the wheel to cultural and racial diversity, so incredibly important to show that this will be a program that will be equitable. It will be accessible in an equitable way. It will be, the money will be disposed of in an equitable way. And moving down the list to geographic diversity, so incredibly important as well, to show that it's not just your big cities within your state that want this. You want the suburban areas in this, and you want the rural areas in this. And it's so important because what will happen is that I've talked a lot about, there could be a chairman who oversees things. You don't know if that chairman is going to be someone who represents a rural part of the state, an urban part of the state, or a suburban part of the state. So when you make your proposals, you want to be able to show you have the endorsement, the support, the grassroots energy behind this that's coming from all 3 areas of your state. Or it could even be within your community. There are rural and more kind of suburban-like areas of a community, and certainly in more rural parts of the community. It depends on, each scenario. And then, of course, organizational size diversity also matters, so that it's not just, the one group that has 20 employees that is the biggest arts institution in town, but it's also the ones that are volunteer driven, that don't have any paid staff because they don't have the money for it. And maybe that's one of the most engaging cases to make. So you know you're in the sweet spot if you can get a full range of diversity like this. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm moving into messaging. So we've talked a lot about like getting yourself ready, who you represent, and things like that. And so there's now messaging. And every legislator has to get elected. And when they get elected, they are making pledges and promises, and they're saying, I want to be elected because I want to accomplish X, Y, and Z. So you want to figure out what it is that they're interested in. You want to look at how your issues relate to that legislator's issues. So one of the things that Americans for, one second for water. One of the things that Americans for the Arts created is something called the Arts and Social Impact Explorer. And you could see the URL up there. This is a really powerful wheel because I'm not able to show it in this static slide, but it actually does spin. Each one of these areas, which is the full range of life and issues, from transportation and workforce development to aging, to working with the military, to education, to tourism issues. I mean, it's the gamut of everything. And you spin that wheel, and if it lands on, say, transportation, an entire range of both research and examples will show up, and public policy points of why arts needs to be integrated into transportation and public transportation issues. With tons of research, it's that combination of data and case-making stories combined. And so you want to kind of think about this and explore it and spend some time on this to kind of strengthen some of your talking points of what you want to address. And I can't possibly don't have the time to go through each one of them, but I will just say that I can't imagine that there is an issue that you're thinking about that isn't covered in this policy wheel. It's that powerful, and it's kept up to date, and it's just stored with an enormous amount of data. So you want to check this out as you do any kind of advocacy whatsoever, even if it's fundraising for fundraising purposes and you want to go for a foundation for a particular kind of project. Look into this. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is now not necessarily your messages for your conference today. I'm just giving you messages of 3 different examples I'm going to be giving you of messages that we've used in the past on a federal level, on state levels, and things like that. So the one that we've probably used the longest is Arts Equal Jobs. And here, this is on that one of our state arts advocacy organizations got onto the state capitol's building on their advocacy day. It was quite powerful. We have used this messaging probably the most prior to the pandemic to talk about how the arts are an economic force for the country, for the states, for communities, how it brings in money, how it creates jobs, how it supports jobs. To see the arts not as just an arts issue, but as an economic issue. And this really kind of helps with, I will say, a lot of legislatures that are Republican controlled, let's say, they really, this message is very appealing to them. Next slide. Thank you, Lance. This is an example of something that we just did at the end of last month, at the end of February. This is a full page ad that Americans for the Arts put into the 3 major political newspapers on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. Roll Call, Politico, and The Hill. And the papers, this is that part of that being relationships with the media. We've been working with those papers for a long time. They put us on either the inside front cover or the back cover. We're not in the middle of the papers. It's because of that long-lasting relationship. They're giving us primo spots for generic prices. So what the message here is clearly about post-pandemic economic free fall of how it's impacted the arts. And here, our messages are about the disproportionate impact of the pandemic with shutdowns on arts businesses, on artists, on nonprofit arts organizations. We're calling them the hardest hit among the sectors of the economy. And it's a combination of all things together here. It's messaging on the top two. The arts unify our country. This is the number one statement that was made by members of Congress following the January 6th upheaval that happened on Capitol Hill. They kept on referring to how the arts will unify our country. Okay, so they believe that directly from their mouths, so we're giving it right back to them. The arts will unify. We know this too. The arts will unify. We know who our target audience is. This is meant, you have to know your target audience when you do these kinds of things. Ours are legislators and their staff. So the arts will unify our country. And then our message added to that, because at the end of February, the Senate was debating and working on the new COVID relief package that's called the American Rescue Plan. And we started seeing grumblings from senators of how money for the arts should not be in an American Rescue Plan. They think it has nothing to do with COVID and economic relief. Well, we have a lot to educate them on that, right? So here we give them with 3 top line points. Where the current average unemployment among cultural workers in the country, and it differs from state to state, I know, but the average is 63%. That's crazy. And the point that we make under the orange part is that that's 10 times higher than the national average of regular unemployment. That's why we are the hardest hit sector. That's 10 times the average unemployment. The second one is 37% nonprofit arts jobs lost. What that's talking about is research was done on how the nonprofit sector as a whole, all nonprofits, all charities as a whole, how much layoffs have there been and things like that. And what we found is that it's 37% among nonprofit arts, which is 3 times higher, if not more, than the average nonprofit job, disproportionately affected. Those are words you want to use in your vocabulary, because I know it's true in West Virginia too, and we'll get to that. And then on our own Americans for the Arts research, 99% of all shows have had some kind of cancellation, or organizations have had to do those kinds of cancellations. It's over, it's a little small for me to read, but I think it's over 450 million admissions that have been lost. And here what we try to turn is not that that's a damage to the organization, but it's a damage to the community, because people bought tickets to want to be enlivened and enhanced with a cultural experience, and they lost that chance. And we know that that is a problem right now, with people not having something that kind of bonds them and connects them in that way. And then the third part in orange is finding out how the economic impact is hitting their state. And we do it by state. And that's the draw to get these legislators to look at things. It's not just a general statement like, go do something. It's like, so, we've just given you the national numbers, but we know what you care about is what's happening in your state. So if you go to that link, and I'll show you an example of what they'll see there, it gets them engaged, because now it's customizing it for them. Okay, next slide, please. And then this is an example of a message that we did within a couple months after the pandemic hit. So it's prior to the chaos of the election. It's just prior to the Black Lives Movement rallies that were going on in the country. but it was right after the stay-at-home orders, within a couple months. And we created some messaging that was primarily for social media, not print media, that some were in video form and some in regular form, that just says the arts create hope, because that's in our messaging what we found was what people needed the most when they were in these stay-at-home orders in the first 2 months, is that fear of isolation and that real experience of isolation, and kind of like the world just getting a little bit darker. So this had no legislative um, question or urging behind it. It was just to kind of keep things moving, to get people behind, knowing that the arts will give you hope, engage in them from home. If people went to the link, they would see examples of what people are doing from home with the arts, just to feel connected again. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Americans for the Arts Action Fund for the last few years have been creating a one-pager, if you count front and back as one page, a one-pager on why the arts matter for every state. And so this is the newest one for West Virginia that's been created. Morgan from my staff has just posted the URL as well in the chat, and you see it above. What the key, and I believe a PDF is going to be added to your resource. But what I want to tell you is, when you go to get a copy of it, not in the next couple of days, because this is the current one, but maybe in 2 weeks, say, or 3 weeks, you want to get the newest copy, please be sure to get it from our website, because we are constantly going to be making changes as new economic data is released. We always put the date on the top right-hand corner. So the most current one today is as of March 7th. So now let me explain what you have in front of you. And these are really nice leave behind pieces, or email behind pieces, that you send to your legislators, that give you some quick facts. Your conference is also giving you these things. So this, maybe you decide you might want to only use this one when you're dealing with your federal legislators. I'll leave that up to you, but it's just another resource for you to have. So if you look at this vertically on the left side, in the light blue, these are all the national numbers as it applies to gross domestic product, jobs. We've now added a whole new section for COVID-19 impact on the economy and jobs, actual economic impact of the nonprofit industry alone, and then funding on the federal level and the state level. And then what's highlighted in green on the right side are comparing apples to apples, the GDP for West Virginia, the jobs in West Virginia compared to a national, COVID impact compared to national, economic impact numbers for the nonprofit arts industry in West Virginia compared to the national, and how much your state gets in funding for the arts compared to the national. It gives context for where West Virginia fits in all this. There are some elected leaders that are really competitive and they want to be number one in everything. Well, for those, this is like a gold mine to give them, because it gives them context of where their state fits in the country. And in terms of how I would articulate the numbers, like if I were in a meeting. So in this case, and the top numbers going as the first row across, which says GDP and jobs, what you have to know is that these are numbers prior to the pandemic. The US Bureau of Economics, Economic Analysis, does not work in real time. These are numbers from 2017. So that's always an important context to give. The newer numbers from the same federal agency, and that's important to know as well, these are not coming from a private research firm. It is not coming from a biased research group. It is coming from a federal government agency that's looking at the gross domestic product and singling out a project area for arts and culture. So the newer numbers for 2018, which is still prior to the pandemic, will be coming out in about a week. So that's why I'm saying use our URL, because we're going to have to update all these. So I would say something along these lines. Prior to the pandemic, the national GDP for the arts and culture jobs and sector, and arts and culture are both the nonprofit and the for-profit. And the definition of arts and culture is quite wide. And it definitely involves a lot of cultural, humanities, historical kind of sectors as well in that large sector. It represented $878 billion of the US economy. And how big is that, one might say? It's 4.5% of the national GDP. That's quite big. And someone would say, well, I still don't have the context. Is 4.5 big? Yeah, it's big. It's about 4 times larger than the educational services sector. Everyone thinks that's very omnipresent with teachers in schools everywhere. But it gives context of cultural workers being so much higher. That kind of context is really important. So 4.5% of the national GDP is represented by arts and culture, which represents 5.1 million jobs. And then the other thing, there's a little bonus in there that says, and more importantly, perhaps, is that the US exports and generates close to $30 billion in trade surplus. That's a net profit for the country when you're exporting as a surplus your arts and culture. How does that fit in with West Virginia? West Virginia, the arts and culture sector represents 3.5% of the state's economy with 17,245 jobs. Okay, and so, and it's bringing in 1.5 billion for the state's gross domestic product, for the state itself. And it also is significantly higher than education services, construction, things like that. So that's the way I would kind of talk about it in a narrative way to highlight what the points are. And then below it is the COVID-19 impact. And that is quite devastating. And now this is post-pandemic, obviously, because it's COVID-19 impact. And these are our newest numbers in terms of what's happening. So where on a national level, it was $878 billion of the GDP, we think since the pandemic, $150 billion of that has been lost because of the economic shutdown and the disproportionate, you'll see me say that a lot, disproportionate impact on the arts as being the hardest hit among industries. Loss average from this larger sector of arts and culture, 52% unemployment. When I showed you that ad earlier, that was just for arts only, not arts and culture. That's why it's even higher when it's the arts only. But we have to compare apples and apples, so I'm keeping it that way. And for West Virginia, I'm not sure if there's more specific research on this within the state, but we're showing that it's a 40% unemployment rate among cultural arts and culture workers based on that larger definition of, and so it's not just arts. So that's quite significant. And there are a lot more details that you might want to pick, but I want to at least show you this existed and how you can talk about it in like a narrative way. Okay, next slide, please.
Hey, Nina, real quick. I just want to tell you, this sheet is amazing because I had 2016 that I sent everything yesterday to the governor's office for our Arts Day proclamations, everything today. I sent this morning when Margaret Mary sent to me. I got one word back about the GDP. Wow. So thank you for this. It's really very, very helpful.
Good, very good. I'm so glad to hear that. So remember when I showed you that ad that I said we placed in the 3 major political, and the bottom orange section said, if you want to find out what happens in your state, go to this URL. Well, this is what they're going to see for West Virginia. And it is a COVID specific impact. So that little section that I just showed you on why the arts matter is now a 2-page extensive COVID impact for every state. And this is the one for West Virginia. That again compares the US economy to West Virginia's economy with lots of updated numbers on things. So this is also front and back two-pager. The back page is a little bit more narrative. This is also accessible to you if you want it. It depends on what, your focus of your point is. Is your focus we need more because of COVID, or is your focus because we need more because the demand is higher? Then you don't have to spend a lot of time on these kind of COVID impact things. It's unique to every state. It's unique to what's unique in your community. Next slide, please. So now, because it's me, it's the federal legislation I'm going to focus on. Margaret Mary will do state kinds of issues, but here is your congressional delegation. Your 2 senators, Manchin and Shelley Capito, and then your 3 House of Representative members. And it's important to develop a relationship, and the kinds of things I've already talked about how important Senator Manchin is. And I have had the benefit with Randall to go into his office. And you're right, Randall does things very differently. And I love him for doing things differently, because essentially the way he does his, what I would call grass tops work, because he has direct access to these folks. The way he does his grass tops work is he opens doors for me to be able to help make the legislative case. He's not trying to put himself in the position of stating all these facts and figures that I give and maybe storytelling that I do. He doesn't want to put me in that position. He wants to say, look, Senator Manchin, the issue is real. I've brought in an expert to communicate it to you. I want you to know that what she says represents what the interests and concerns are of West Virginia. Can you give her 5 minutes to make her to tell you about this? That's golden. That's absolutely golden. Not everybody wants to do it that way. Sometimes they want to be the deliverer of the message. I'm fine with that. But in this case, you have Randall, who is a treasure to not only the state, but nationally, because some of your legislators are those people that have an impact on the nation. And so one of those examples was also Shelley Moore Capito, who we had a one-on-one meeting with Randall, because she is a member of what's called the Senate Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. That subcommittee is in charge of the nation's natural and cultural resources. So funding for things like the National Endowment for the Arts, Humanities, things like that, all go through the committee that she sits on. And when we went to go visit, the Republicans were in control of the Senate. So she had a really important role. And we were during a time when, as you will recall, the Trump administration, when they came in, every year they proposed zeroing out and terminating the federal cultural agencies. So we needed to rely on some key Republicans who would stand up to that, to say, no, we don't agree, Mr. President. We think that these agencies are not only critical to the nation, but they're critical to our state. And so we needed Senator Capito, Senator Manchin to hear those points, and especially Senator Capito, who sits on that key committee, to hear those points. And in the end, Randall brought it home. And again, he's not just bringing it home, he brought it home for the whole country, because we were able to make sure that a firewall was created between a Republican-controlled White House and a Republican-controlled Senate, to make sure that the Republicans in the Senate did not agree with the Republican in the White House that they think it should be terminated. And it doesn't matter, how you voted and what you think. I think we all can agree that we agree the arts are vital to our community, and so we wouldn't want those to be terminated, regardless of what party you affiliate with. So that's an example. The key thing here is Congressman McKinley represents the northern part of West Virginia, Congressman Mooney, the central part of West Virginia, and Carol Miller, who's your newest member since 2019, represents the southern part of West Virginia. I would say Congressman McKinley has a fairly not like, he's not a cheerleader of the arts, but he's also not someone who thinks it should be terminated. So someone we can count on. But I would say if any of you are represented by the other two members of Congress, it would be helpful if you could develop a relationship with them for them to see the federal dollars that go through the state, through Randall, who's doing sub-granting, or you're getting directly from NEA and NEH, that it is serving a purpose in your community. And they need to know that, because right now they think things like the NEA and NEH can go away. So you need to let them know it can't go away. One of the things I should have mentioned in that Why the Arts Matter fact sheet, the bottom row section, that actually has information on not only how much your state legislature gives to the arts, but how much Randall's group is getting from the NEA. So for instance, in FY 2020, if I have my numbers right, Randall, the state legislature gave $933,815 to the state. Well, the NEA, through federal funding and sub-granting to all the states, gave the West Virginia Arts Commission $745,000. So just $200,000 less than what the state legislature is giving for Randall's group and Lance to re-grant out to cultural organizations within the state. But add to that another $482,000 were grants that the NEA made directly to cultural organizations within the state. If you combine those two together, 1.2 million or more is coming from the federal level of grants to arts organizations within the state. It's really important for legislators, these congressional representatives and senators, to understand how important that federal share is, and that it's not going to just places like New York City and Los Angeles. It's going to all parts of your state as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are the big federal issues that Americans for the Arts and major national coalitions of arts organizations are getting behind? Is number one is we want to essentially create a WPA style work progress arts jobs bill that will be in the next infrastructure bill, now that it's almost done, the American Rescue Plan, which is a relief program for economic relief and healthcare relief resulting from the pandemic. What members of Congress are going to be moving on to in May, April and May, is a recovery of a rebuilding or building back even better. The second thing we're looking for is if there is this kind of federal wide inclusivity of the arts and eligibility of arts organizations in various different federal programs, from transportation and labor and community service and down the line. We think that there should be an advisor directly to the president, a presidential arts and culture advisor that's housed within the White House, to kind of oversee that initiative. We think funding for the NEA and NEH go up to $1 per capita, double it. So that's double the amount of money I just talked about that is going to West Virginia would happen if we were to index funding for the arts and culture at the federal level at $1 per person. And then finally, securing more COVID relief funds, which I'll go to in a minute. So the last two slides, if we could go to the first one. Okay, so some key principal takeaways from my advocacy discussion today that hopefully I've touched on for the most part. One is identify and learn more about the priorities of your targeted elected officials. You have to figure out who it is that you need to make your case to that will make a difference in making change to policy and appropriations. And you got to learn more about them before you start talking to them. I don't ever go into a meeting with a legislator without having done a deep background check on what they're interested in, what their voting records are, things like that. Two, match up your priorities with their priorities using that social impact wheel to figure out what are their priorities. Is it the environment, whatever the list is. Then establish a working relationship with all of your elected officials, federal, state, and local. You need them at all different points in time. And sometimes, if it's a new member of Congress, if it's a new state legislator, just reach out to them and say, look, I want to introduce myself to you. I am a cultural organization within your community, within your district. I want to let you know that I have benefited from state arts funding. I've benefited from federal arts funding. And I want you to know that I'm here for you as an expert to let you know what's happening in your community for the arts and how policies at the state and federal level are impacting us. That's such a beautiful introduction that any legislator and their staff would embrace. And that's just the introductory one. And then you'll have things where you really do ask for things. Start gathering, if you haven't already, relevant data, provide real life stories. It's that combination of storytelling and data, empirical data, that is absolutely convincing. And you want to be an advocate year round. Number 5, it's not just today that you're going to be doing your advocacy. You want to be able to do this year round. You want to engage the media on your issues. Number 7, you want to engage social media and tag elected officials so that they see it. You want to become an influencer in your community. The better your network, the more connected your network, the more direct relationship you have with decision makers, the bigger you become as an influencer in your community. The bigger you become as an influencer in your community, the more what you ask for will be listened to and followed through on, because you can influence others. Practice your elevator speech before you make the speech. Sometimes you only get 1 minute, 2 minutes to say what you need to say. Practice it. Don't try to do it on the spur of the moment. And don't forget to follow up on your ask. And don't forget to actually make your ask. Whatever it is, even if it's an introduction, you still want to end with something you're asking for, whether it is who is the right person that I can stay in communication with in your office? Or the ask is, so will you support a 10% increase in the state arts budget? Whatever the ask is, just ask. You've got to ask something so that it gives you a thread to come back to or something to follow up on. And then in the interest of time, if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to show something. These are the highlights of what's in the new American Rescue Plan that's being voted on today by the House and will be signed by the president either tonight or tomorrow. And tomorrow the president will give a primetime speech talking about it. I can see that I'm running out of time, so there's a link up there that has details to each one of these pieces. And I invite you, if there's time, I'll answer these kind of questions during Q&A, but I want to leave it here so there's time for both Margaret, Mary, and for Q&A. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Margaret. You can take the slides down.
Thank you, Nina, very much. Can I just say, I don't have anything else to say because you just said the most incredible thing. And I'm so happy that here in our state that you're hearing this from these perspectives on a national level and how important your voice is on a national level. And I loved the story about the very rural place that, somehow has the connection, and they're the ones that helped everybody. And I think that a lot of times you think your voice isn't important, and yet it is. And that's one of the big takeaways from that. And knowing now where all these resources are can really help you with what you do. And, if you're nervous or worried about, I've never talked to a legislator, you're the one that votes for them. You're the one that creates their position. And so you are coming from a position of power, and you need to keep that in your mind as you are going forward. I'm going to talk mostly about the Arts Advocacy of West Virginia legislative agenda, which we do every year. I'm going to talk about a little bit more because we've changed sort of the way it looks in the format. And one of the things we want to think about is, Randall has done a great job he's asked for the same amount of funds that I'm not quite ready for this, Lance. I'm not quite ready for this. He's done a great job. We're asking for the same funds, the Arts Advocacy Group and us, 900,000. The governor has included it in his budget, but I think Nina pointed out that sometimes between that and the actual budget that gets passed, is things can happen. And so what we want to do is be sure that the governor's budget gets passed by the legislature as it relates to the arts. So as I said, it looks a little different this year. And before I get into the details of that, I want to talk a little bit about why it looks different. The National Association of State Arts Agencies did a study with a consulting group, because they had started off, they looked back historically and saw that at one point science got nothing. And then suddenly they started getting everything, lots and lots of money. So they thought, what was the pathway that they went through? And so they decided, NASA decided they wanted to go through that same pathway. So that's why they engaged this firm to give them the appropriate information to do that. So what they did is this particular report, and I'm condensing it. It was an hour plus webinar and it was incredible. But the report identifies words and concepts and messaging that actually has a positive reaction from legislators. And it was very well done. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but many legislators were spoken to on all levels and so forth and so on. So some of the key words that were identified, and it's like this recovery, like the arts can do recovery, that big sheet that Nina was showing us. These are words that resonate with people. The words were strength, innovation, prosperity, and community. And so those words and those concepts are important to people in decision-making positions in our legislative bodies. So I think that's important for us to keep those words in mind. And I think it's, we've all, back, so many years ago, we were saying arts, arts, arts. And then we started saying arts and creativity, arts and creativity. But what we need to then say, the next thing is arts and creativity lead to innovation. And then you're in the wheelhouse of the economy at that point, because everybody's talking about the jobs of the 21st century require innovation. We need people who are innovative thinkers. For those of you who are familiar with Brad Smith, who is the retired CEO and now chairman of the board for Intuit, he's from Huntington, basically, and he's doing a lot of talking across the state through Marshall University and so forth. And these are the kinds of things, the jobs of the future that he's talking about. And these are the very words that he's using. So those are things to kind of keep in your mind. I think it's important when you're talking to your people, and Nina touched on this, is you need to tell them how they are being used. These dollars are being used in your community. If you're going to talking about, you're from Greenbrier County, you're talking about the organizations that are there, what they do, how many people they employ, how many services they provide. You need your own report card to take to them for your organization, to explain to them, this is what we do. Because while they may live in your community, they may not have that information, and it's important to provide it to them. The years ago when I was at the Huntington Museum of Art, I had a report card, and then we had this thing, it was like legislative talking points that were different than the talking points you might give to a funder, but they were very specific about what their dollars did. The next thing I want to talk about is, let me just see it, blah, blah. Before we pull that up, let's go ahead and pull it up and I'll go over it. And you'll see it looks totally different. So what we did was we took the following parts of our world, the economy, our health, education, and community. And we then sort of used the concepts that came out in this study and put them within the, segregated them within each of these particular things. And one of the things we did with this is we also had each of these items, these boxes were created as social media shared, separate social media things to share. And we are sharing those now across the state, and we've had pretty good response. Something I don't think we've done is tag legislators, as Nina suggested. And so I think that's something, and I think I saw Sarah Krickenberger on here. Sarah, I think that's something we want to think about doing, because I think that would be really helpful. I have had arts organizations that I've never heard of come contact me through social media and say, can we share these too? I'm like, heck yes, you can share them. That's the whole point. So these have turned out to be pretty good. This has turned out to be a pretty good document for us. If you look under the economy, we talk about, if you just read through this, the foundation for creativity, they equip an innovative workforce, generate new ideas. I think this is another one, keep our state globally competitive. I think that's something that appeals to people thinking about the strength of our world here. Create jobs, drive tourism, provide opportunities for young people, or an engine, pay high dividends and investments. And this is a very, you've got now this other incredible document that got really, really detailed stuff, but those are things that you weave into your conversation. And this is a good leave behind, as is the other one, because it gives them stuff to use in when they're talking within, if something's being considered in a committee or in session or whatever. I don't really necessarily want to go through all of these because this is in your thing, but I think if you just look here, you can see, we've got, these, and health is a big deal here because of the opioid crisis. And, people in recovery, if you were on the conference yesterday and listened to how important creativity is to people in recovery, the Alzheimer's research that's out there, these are all things based on who you're talking to, you can pull out and talk about specifically. I think in education, it's critical to think about how we close the achievement gap. We have so many gaps in our country now, and if we can close the education gaps, that's going to go a long way to closing other gaps. And I think it's importance of talking about unleashing human potential. I think those are important words. So many people's horizon is so short. They are in a position of not thinking they can accomplish or be who they are capable of being. They don't see far enough. The arts allow that to happen, especially during the education process. So it changes their vision of the future. And so I think that's a really critically important thing, especially here in Appalachia. With the community, we're back here with the word strengthen the fabric of our communities. And this last one, create communities where young people want to build families. I mean, everybody wants to bring families, people, young professionals to their community in West Virginia, because we have had for some time a declining population. We want to attract the right kind of people here. So with that said, these are things that you could read through and think about, but I want to highlight a couple other things that are more like dollar factual. So the budget request that we, as well as the Department of Arts, Culture, and History asking for is $900,000. And this is for the competitive arts fund within the education lottery fund. This does not include line items and all those other things, the fairs and festivals. This is a separate line item. And this is the one that we focus on because it is dollars that you have to compete for, you have to report on. There's a lot of responsibility if you have these funds. So I think it's important to talk about that is only for that one line item, and how tax dollars are matched from the NEA. You know, it's, if we don't do 900,000, there's 900,000 we're not going to get from the NEA, or less, whatever their allocation is. And I think that's a good sell to anybody, whether they are pro arts or not. At the bottom of the economy one, we talk about that this represents 19% of the West Virginia workforce. And I want to compare that to the numbers that you all have, Nina, to make sure that we are, I'd like for those things to be in sync. The next box down here is really critical, because every dollar in 2021, fiscal year 2021, every dollar leveraged another $21 in investments. So that's a pretty amazing return on the funds that the state is putting into the arts. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about over here was about cultural tourism. You know, there's the arts and tourism are can be best friends. They can really go together and do a lot more than each one of them can do on their own. But research has shown over and over again, and I think it started with the Americans for the Arts research. I think that's where I first saw this many, many years ago, is that cultural tourists stay longer, they spend more money, and they benefit the tax base, and they're also likely to return. So these are all things that are important to us as we often look at our ability to become, to grow our tourism economy in West Virginia, because we don't have to invent it, it's already here. We just have to sell it the right way. The last thing that's important to highlight is that these dollars, these grant dollars, benefit all of our 17 Senate districts. It's important for them to know, like they may say, well, I'm from such and such a county and there's no arts organization in our county. There's an arts organization in a contiguous county that is serving your people. For example, in Huntington, in Cabell County, we abut to Wayne County. Wayne County doesn't have a strong arts operation. The Huntington Museum of Art serves Wayne County children. And Wayne County people come to the museum, they take classes, they visit the museum and so forth. So there's somebody, these dollars are moving throughout the whole state. So with that said, I want to highlight a couple things that I wrote down that I was impressed with. Well, I was impressed with everything Nina said, of course, but I think I love this idea of grass tops. It's exactly how you raise money. It's the same thing. You know, like if you are a development person, this is something that you look at those grass top people. And in fact, the oval thing would fit any project that you were working on. Those are all the steps you have to do to accomplish something or to create something new. And I love this, when we were talking about talking to the media, I think in our state, what would be important would be for you to go to your own media in your local area with this document and say, we want you to do a story on this. Because over the years, Arts Advocacy has tried to do statewide media press releases, and we've not had a lot of luck because it doesn't come from somebody that the people in the newspaper know, or the television or the radio. And so I think if people can, within their own group, within their own locale, use this document and the other materials that have been provided within the Google Docs thing or whatever the folder is, you could make a really good case for them writing some kind of story or doing something. And then this idea of tagging people in your social media posts, you know, it doesn't take very long at all. And it's a media you control. You control the message. And it should always be positive. It shouldn't be denigrating anybody. It should always be positive about the arts, and just keep tagging these people, even if they are voting against you. Because they need to know, like if they start looking and you've got 500 likes to what you just post, they're going to have to start thinking about who am I representing. It'll be part of what they do to do that. The other thing I want to say is all this data that Nina provided to you, they could do it because they've asked people to do surveys. Now they've researched some that other people do, but if you get a request to do a survey, it can directly impact you. You may think, Americans for the Arts, you know, how is this going to impact me? I think have you all done 3 surveys now since COVID? I've been invited and asked to do all 3, and I've done every one of them, even though they took a long time. If they did take a long time, they really weren't onerous by any means. But I think it's important to respond to those requests, because if you don't provide the information, how's anybody going to know how to help you?
Margaret, can I just say one thing on that point?
Yes.
The first research we did was within days of the government shutdown in mid-March. Yeah. And we collected enough information in those first 10 days that we made that first case to the CARES Act to include money for the NEA and NEH for COVID fast track relief, to get gig artists defined, to be able to get unemployment, to be identified as a small business for PPP. It's only because we had that research of the devastating impact that people responded to in the first 10 days that was able to give it to Congress, because we were the first ones with research.
Well, and the thing that was important is you didn't say, oh, we did this research and then you stopped. You did 2 more, because at the beginning, we didn't necessarily know everything that was going to happen.
Right.
And so the second one asked more, you know, what some of my answers changed from survey 1 to survey 2 and survey 2 to survey 3. And I know you've got a million things on your plate, but you have to keep thinking this other stuff is really gonna make a difference, and it will. The last thing I'd like to say, and I believe this wholeheartedly, and Nina said it specifically, make your case from your heart. When you speak from your heart and something that you truly believe in and you're truly committed to, you have a much higher ability to convince others. And so I think it's really important I mean, you don't want to sit there and cry about the arts, but I mean, you want to really talk about why it's important. And you can show that your own passion for it, and passion is contagious. So with that said, I am going to close out my remarks. And Lance, how do you want to do the next thing? Did you want me to say something, or did you want to say something about, I can start off, and I'm going to cry over this. I think all you know that Jeannie Mosier passed away around Thanksgiving, very unexpectedly. And everything I know about fighting for the arts, she taught me. Lance, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Jeannie was a big help, both in this job and my last job, which was the film office, and a really larger than life presence, and somebody who really lived the commitment to what they believed in, and very, very large shoes to fill.
So we just thought it might be nice to recognize her while we're talking about advocacy, because she lived and breathed it and built a lot of things in Berkeley Springs and throughout the state with her PAN work, and when she served on the Commission on the Arts as well, and her work with tourism. It's just been amazing what she's done over the years and her contributions. So we just wanted to recognize that before we closed out and had Q&A.
Okay, I have some questions, and I actually need some clarification from Nina. The Americans for the Arts, they put out a report card on your members of Congress. I tried to get this cleaned up because it says in there for the senators, if they are on the Appropriations Committee, then they necessarily do not sign on to letters, and they put non-applicable. They did that for Senator Manchin. Unfortunately, they did not do that for Senator Capito. and her office called, and I straightened that out. And I've tried to get Eric to call me back to straighten that out on your report. So I think it needs to be said that Senator Capito, during the last administration, with Senator Murkowski and Senator Collins, every time the NEA was cut, not only did they put the funding back in, they increased the funding for the National Endowment of the Arts. And we as West Virginians need to know that. As far as our Congress people, I called because the report card showed that they didn't support things. There were some reasons why they did not sign on to letters, because it didn't necessarily have to do with arts. I can tell you from my conversations with all three members of our Congress that they strongly support the arts. They are slowly getting on all the committees, the culture committees, STEM to STEAM. So, and it was Jean Mosier, and I'm so glad you all did this for her, Jean. She taught us so much. She's the one that taught me figures lie and liars figure. So get the facts. You need to know that all 5 of our members of Congress support the arts completely. And I just want to give an update on I got the figures correctly for the money during the COVID. Fairs and festivals, we all know that a lot of fairs and festivals, and some of you on here can attest to that. There's $1,266,000 of fairs and festivals money. A lot of that goes to arts organizations. The governor doubled that money this year to make sure that we would come through this. And there's an account called Preservation West Virginia. There's 52 organizations. They are all arts organizations. That's another $451,921. The governor doubled that this year. With the CARES Act funding, and the governor gave us more CARES Act funding, we had $381,976 in grants that went out. We had about $430,000 from the feds. The governor gave us $290,988 at the end to give more money to the arts to 34 arts organizations that got CARES Act funding. So by the time we put fairs and festivals together, CARES Act, our federal allotment, our state allotment, everything came up to $5,934,856 this year. So West Virginia continues to move forward with the arts. We had a flat budget. I said this yesterday. There were no increases, but they did give us the $85,500 that we needed to match our new federal funds. And on top of that, they gave us $16,000 to match our new funds for Save the Music. And they gave us almost $50,000 for historic preservation development grants that a lot of you, especially Carnegie, GBT, those people have applied for. And the Department of Education on top of that gives us $225,000 for our education programs. So the charts are great, but you need to understand the facts behind them. But always write and say thank you to the legislators. Nina will tell you that tenfold. A thank you goes a long way, right, Margaret Mary?
It's the most important thing you can do. I mean, I wrote letters to the governor and to like the NEA and a bunch of people with our CARES money, because the NEA fought for that as well. And it was important for them to hear how well we handled that money they delegated to us. So I just think there's a lot to be thankful for, that we need to always, you can never say thank you too much. Let's just
and I think the most important thing Nina said earlier is the messaging. The arts unify us. I always say the arts are the great equalizer, but the arts unify us. And we need to remember those 3 points in her messaging. And we need to get that to all of our local people. Nina, thank you. Margaret Mary, thank you. I've been running back and forth between this and public broadcasting, and we've got 2 bills on first reading. So thank you so much. It's been a great session. Thank you all for everything you do in our communities. Lance, take it away.
Okay, we're going to go to our question and answer. This is from anonymous attendee. Is there a breakdown on the web or otherwise of the types of organizations and types of workers that are included in the catch-all term arts and culture?
Nina, that's a question, good one for you.
Yes. Now, are you referring to the Bureau of, it depends on what research. So if it's the Bureau of Economic Analysis, that is a federal level one. And the answer is yes to all of them, but what is included is different based on the research. So the Bureau of Economic Analysis, there is a list, and Morgan, if you could put Randy Cohen's email address, which is rcohen@artsusa.org. Randy Cohen is our Vice President of Research and Information, the guru on all of this research, whether it's our research or another important entity's research. He will be able to tell you in detail, like what the NAICS codes are or NAICS codes, or just give you the full listing of what was included in the research for Bureau of Economic Analysis, what was included in the Johns Hopkins research, what was included in the Brookings Institute research, what's included in our research. Sometimes we are known for our economic impact of the nonprofit arts industry. He has a very detailed list of what's included in there. So you're asking right questions, like, as we talk about this research data, we have to be clear on what was the universe of people that we were serving.
Okay. Next question comes from our friend Vicki Willman at CATF. Also a question, what is the source of the data point regarding cultural tourists staying longer and spending 60% more than other travelers? Thank you.
Yes, so that's what I was just researching to be able to give you, but I'm going to give you this document, and if I don't reach it in time before we close out, it has the information on that tourism piece that Margaret Mary mentioned. We always source that inside our Arts Advocacy Day handbook, and as soon as I'm done talking, I'm going to post it so I can get it into the chat. If I don't get it in time, like I said, I'll send it to Lance and Margaret Mary so they can put it into your resource chart. But in general, what I'll just say is that piece, there is a separate organization that deals with tourism, and they do research, and we've asked them to add questions about arts related tourism. And that's where it was discovered about cultural tourists stay longer than, say, sports tourists.
Okay, we had a separate thing from Emily Hilliard, our friend over at the West Virginia Humanities Council. She had said that she had some difficulty with the shortened link. And so I just included, and somebody else, and Jenna just sent it as well, but that's the URL for our drive that has all the information in it. And we will be updating that and keeping that up far long after the conference. This will be a resource that you can pull up at any time and have. So, okay. Any other questions? Anyone?
I think someone asked a question about the recording. Is that going to be available? I think Tanita asked that early on. Maybe somebody responded already.
Yes, we are recording it, and it will be posted at a later date. If you're transitioning the website from the old website into a newer, much more dynamic website, and once that's established, we'll have these videos up. We do have some of the videos that we did back in the spring and early summer, the training videos and outreach videos that we did during the COVID times, and we'll probably be doing more of those as well. So.
I want to thank Lance for all, and Paul and all the staff, Jenna and Jim and
Cedric, Liz, Barbie.
Liz, for all the Barbie forever, all the hard work you did to put this on. I think it was great. And I also want to thank everybody for the opportunity to meet Nina. We had wonderful conversations prior to this, and she's a real, we're kindred spirits. It's just been a great thing to connect with her.